Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice Podcast. The Heart of Hospice Podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode of The Heart of Hospice is being sponsored by Care Boss, the latest book by Jennifer O'Brien. Care Boss is the book that reminds family caregivers that they are the CEO of their loved one's care. Jennifer has served in healthcare leadership for over 35 years and was also the personal caregiver for her parents and her husband. Care Boss is written to empower caregivers, but it's more than just a book. It's a workbook and organizational tool as well. Check it out at jenniferaobrien.com.
Social worker Rosie Gaston is working to ensure that people with serious illness feel seen and heard and decide what a good death means for them. My guest, Rosie Gaston, is a passionate and energetic clinical social worker with over a decade of experience. She is supporting individuals, families, and professionals through the intricate journey of end-of-life care. She got her start as a hospice volunteer and pursued a Master of Social Work degree. She's since worked in oncology, in palliative care, and hospice, leading and collaborating with exceptional interdisciplinary teams. Rosie founded A Better Ending to focus on personalized support, focus on community education, and foster professional development in the end-of-life care domain. You can connect with Rosie on her website, abetterending.org. You're going to love this discussion. Her energy is contagious. Her energy, and I would say her advocacy, is as well. We took some time during our conversation to talk about advanced care planning, what it meant for us personally, and why the need for advanced care planning is so critical. We also talked about how hospice agencies want to give a patient a quote-unquote good death. She described how she facilitates discussions about what a good death would be like for her patients. She also discussed with me how she explains morphine use, and we talked about some of the myths that surround morphine use in hospice. We also talked about denial and how that is frequently a part of a patient's and a caregiver's journey. Rosie also talked about her work helping patients and families write an obituary. She believes that most people want to write their own obituary, and she shares that experience with me. So there's a lot to unpack and a lot to learn from my guest today, social worker Rosie Gaston. Rosie, welcome to the Heart of Hospice Podcast. I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm pumped to be here.
We are going to tear this conversation up. It's going to be so fun. We have already discovered that we are kindred spirits, so it's going to be a great interview. I'm so excited. We are going to start with an end of life deck question. One of my favorite things. And of course, advanced care planning, because you are all about advanced care planning. All right, here's your question, Rosie.
Okay.
Have you chosen a final resting place? Your possible answers are yes, I'll be with the family. B, just one place I want to be scattered in my favorite spots. Or C, in an urn beside you so we can watch TV together.
So this Christmas, I actually sat down with my family and talked with them about how for my birthday present this year, which is in a few months, that I want all of them to complete this questionnaire that is about their final arrangement wishes. So how they want their body to be taken care of and their wishes for their service. I mean, maybe this a little bit of my own death anxiety, recognizing that if something happens, I'll be the one putting this into place for my family, but also wanting to make sure that I can honor them, right? So of course I had to do this for myself. I had to go through and, fill out this questionnaire, which was emotional at some points, but it addressed this question. So the answer ended up being B. My wishes are, I want to do body donation in whatever way will benefit the most amount of people. And then I would like my body to be cremated. And then there is this beautiful 9 Mile Creek here just south of Minneapolis. And it's the place that I go when I kind of need to get my head straight. I need a little time to myself. And there is this beautiful bench right by the river. And it's where I sit. And so I have told my family that I would like to be scattered there. So that way, when they need a place to slow down, to come and spend some time with me, that they can go to my favorite bench where my ashes have been scattered. And hopefully no one from the DNR is listening to this, because I know this is a little illegal, but people are still doing it. So, but yes, that is definitely my wish.
I love it. I love it. Spoken like a true hospice social worker.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So for your birthday, what you asked for were your family members to do their advanced care planning.
Yeah.
You hear it, right, Rosie? You hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I would totally do the same thing. But I get what you're saying about you did your own to start with and how it was emotional, because I struggle with my advanced care planning. I don't have mine complete. And part of it is because now I have 3 grandchildren. I've got a 4th one on the way in a few months. I really found it to be very emotional.
Yeah.
Very emotional when I started to think about that, and if I wanted to leave legacy letters and what the end of my life would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was way harder than I thought it would be.
And it just takes me back to that most of the great things in life are hard, right? Most of the great things in life that we do take a little bit of bravery. And so I just, every time I have done this for myself, and I mean, I'm in my mid-30s, so I hope that I have a very long life to live. But in my mind, if something unexpected happens, my family is going to be devastated enough that I don't want them to be scrambling. I want them to know that this is how Rosie wants her life honored. This is how she wants her life celebrated. Or even these are the decisions that we need to make in a medical setting to make sure that we're aligning with what she really wants with herself. So while I hear you, Helen, that it's not an easy thing, it is one of the greatest gifts you can give your family. And if you need some help with it, you and I can just hop on the phone together. I'm happy to be your support as you go through that.
We may need to do that. But that brings up a really good point. If it's really difficult or it feels emotional for the person doing it for themselves, imagine how much more so it is for a family member who's trying to interpret something vague or flying blind to make a decision for you.
While they are in the thick of debilitating grief.
Yes.
Right.
Maybe fatigue, financial overwhelm, decision-making burden, all of those things that come with it. And not every relationship is a good, healthy relationship to begin with. Sometimes we're making decisions for people that we're estranged from, that we don't know very well because they have not allowed us to know them. Or maybe the relationship became distance and there's only a legal connection, relationally.
Yeah, and I think part of this too, I mean, we're touching on a big and important thing. And ultimately, it's what I say is this is one of the greatest gifts that we can give people that we love. And usually one of the last gifts that we can give them is by doing this planning. There's things that we can do to make it so much easier on those that we love, but also thinking about it from a personal perspective. Like, I like being in control of my life. I like being in control of my wishes. And so for me, it's also a way of being able to put this out there to say, I don't want someone making these decisions for me. I just want someone enacting them for me. I want someone to be my voice or to put them into play, but I don't need them to make decisions for me. I can do that for myself.
Well, with a well-written advanced care plan, we call those folks decision makers, but technically they're enactors, right, is what you're saying, and advocates and
Yep.
liaisons and representatives. But the decisions technically have already been made if we've done our advanced care planning.
Absolutely.
I know you can't predict every scenario, nor should you try. I think that would be horribly overwhelming emotionally and mentally to try to think about, okay, if I have dementia or I have end-stage renal failure or a pulmonary disease, how exhausting is that to try to anticipate all of those particular scenarios? But yeah, it just gets complicated. It just gets complicated after a while.
And I also think you touched on a really important piece of having a good healthcare directive that you're filling out.
Yeah.
Because, for me, somebody who has been at the fork in the road for hundreds of patients as they're navigating or their decision makers are navigating, do we continue treatment? Maybe do we go to the ICU or do we transition to this comfort focused plan of care? Like, I have seen the magic of a clear healthcare directive take that burden off of their loved one's shoulders. And also, there's times I got to tell you, Helen, I've done hospice in the hospital for many years, and patients that I see who just had an awful ICU stay, and then they come to us on hospice and they die 24 to 48 hours later.
Yeah.
Or it's just like, man, I can't help but think, is this really what you wanted the final weeks and days of your life to look like? Is this really what you wanted?
Right.
And I think having these plans put into place can really help us have a death that more aligns with what we want.
When I think about that, our families definitely need to know, but with so many people dying in the hospital when they really would rather be at home, it's important to remember that a lot of times that doctor has never seen you before.
Yeah.
You're assigned somebody when you come in, your doctor's gone for a weekend or the middle of the night, or you're just assigned to a hospitalist because your doctor doesn't have privileges where you end up.
Yeah.
And so without an advance directive, if you can't speak, if you can't give those directions and your family doesn't have a clue as to what you would want, they're all just literally flying blind, pulling decisions out of a hat. And I do tell people, I counsel them, if there's no advance directive, look at this person's life. How did they live? Were they religious? Had you ever heard them say anything spontaneous in casual conversation? I think a lot of people have done that. I don't want to be kept alive on machines type comment. But when you have this whole group of people that doesn't know what your wishes are, they're having to look at how you lived your life. Have you been debilitated for 15 years, had a chronic disease, currently receiving treatment, or had you been active? Is this something acute now that we're having to look at this very quickly? There's a lot that goes into advanced care planning and sort of deciphering that. And we could make this whole episode about advanced care planning if we wanted to. There's so much there. But let's start with you. So you're a social worker, and social workers, man, you can work in all sorts of different silos inside social work. How did you end up, and what attracted you to working with people who are dealing with end-of-life issues?
So, I got to take us back about 13 years. I was 25 years old, and I was living in Key West, Florida. Before I became a social worker, the industry I worked in was the restaurant industry. And so I was living this beautiful beach life of, beach during the day with my dog Finn, and then going to work at the restaurant at night. But ultimately, for somebody who is ambitious and who really has always felt like I have a purpose on my life to help people, I had to kind of figure out what was next. So I cracked open this book called The Quarter Life Crisis. And this is a real thing for people who question. It is a real thing to wonder at 25, like, what am I supposed to be doing? I also have an incredible dad who has seen the height of my potential and lovingly pushes me to reach that. So he was encouraging me to come back to Minnesota and to get my master's. So I came back, but I needed to start volunteering because I wasn't quite sure, do I go, my undergrad is in clinical psychology, so do I go the psych route? And honestly, social work wasn't even on my radar. I was looking at provider school, looking at different options. And so I went on Craigslist and looked at volunteer opportunities. And there was one for a local hospice agency posted there.
Oh.
So I kind of, I sat there for a moment and thought, hospice, could this be something I give a try? And I thought back to my mom. I have an incredible mom who is an RN. She worked in the ED and the ICU in small town Minnesota. And she is somebody who I would say prepared us for life compared to protected us from it, right? She wouldn't shy away from hard conversations, including conversations and exposure to death, dying, and grief. It was something she was always transparent about. And I think that impact, along with my own experiences with death, dying, and grief as a teenager, I thought, yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can give this a go. So I started volunteering, and they put me in a skilled nursing facility with about three patients that I would see. And before you knew it, I was there for 15 hours a week, spending time with these women and getting to know them and hearing their life stories and bearing witness to, their worries or their regrets or their fears. And at this time, I had an undergrad in psych, but that doesn't give you so much of the tools to sit with that. But I naturally had some of those tools. And I just found a lot of purpose in it. And before you knew it, I was starting my Master's of Social Work program. I picked social work because ultimately I have a bit of a weak stomach. I joke that with some people that I do feelings, not fluids. So, social work felt like the right route for me to go. As I've always in my personal life just been a bit of the kind of the counselor friend or the person that people go to. And I think along with the social justice component of social work, I was like, this is it. This is who I'm supposed to be. So ultimately, I didn't become a social worker and then find end-of-life care. I found end-of-life care and became a social worker to serve people who are living with life-limiting conditions.
I love that. You found end-of-life care, and then you basically educated and created a career for yourself based on your longing to work with that population inside the healthcare continuum. That's pretty awesome. I love that story because I think a lot of people who work in end-of-life care stumble into it, or they feel called to it like this. Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so when you and I talked to get to know each other a little bit, we started talking about that catchphrase that everybody uses these days in end-of-life care, a good death. Yep. Which I'm starting to dislike because I think we use it incorrectly. I think that we as healthcare providers, as end-of-life workers, assign the definition of a good death to someone, to our patients. What are your thoughts about how we use that catchphrase, a good death, in hospice care?
So, I always try to operate from a place of grace. And so when I think about hospice utilizing it, I think it's the goal, right? Our goal is to give people a good death. But I think the important piece is to define what a good death means for that person, right? So I agree with you that there's pieces of it that I struggle with. And I think that comes down more to some of the marketing around hospice compared to the conversations surrounding hospice, right? So, I'll tell you, I've used some of this language when I'm sitting with my patients because I want them to tell me, and again, this is when we have the privilege of them coming on early. Like this is another issue with hospice, right? Is people enroll too late, they get referred too late. And so we don't really get to have these intimate conversations about when you think about your end of your life, what would a death look like that honors your life?
Yeah.
What would a death look like that's peaceful for you? And so when people come on too late, unfortunately, we're in this super reactive stage of just like getting them comfortable, making sure their safety needs are met, making sure their care needs are met. But when we have time to really sit down and talk with our patients to say, what do you want this to look like? How can we support what your goals are? And for some people, that haven't had a lot of exposure to death or, quite a bit of fears surrounding it, sometimes it takes providing some suggestions for me. Like, would this be at home? Would your loved ones be taking care of you? Would it be somebody else taking care of you? Because maybe you are a father of 2 daughters and you don't want them doing those personal cares for you, right? Would it be in a hospice home where your family gets to just come and be your family and not worry about the last time you received your medications or the last time you got a shower? Who would you want around you, right? There's some people who say, as many people that want to come, you just keep that door open. Other people say, just my closest people. And I've even had some that say, once I get to this point, I really don't want visitors because I don't want my people to remember me like this.
Yeah.
Thinking of, and then I take it a step further to say, like, what music have you loved to listen to your whole life? How can I make sure that we have that in the background? Right? How can, and thinking about other things that honor their life. For one guy, he wanted me to have ESPN on the whole time.
ESPN, the sports thing?
Yes. He's like, I've never listened to music. I've never been a fan of that, but I always had ESPN on in my house all the time. And he didn't want silence. And so like, I made sure that there was a note right by the TV, right on the door that said, please make sure it's on. I don't remember what the channel was at that hospice residence, but please make sure it's on this channel for him. So I hear you. And, I think when we use the description of a good death, I think we have to stop and say, like, not what does this mean to me, but what does that mean for that person? And so even when sometimes I'm with my patients who are no longer responsive, I'll look to their family and I'll ask some of these questions. When your mom was doing, the dishes on a Saturday afternoon, what was she listening to for music? Or ask some of those questions like that to bring their life back into their end of life space.
Right. One of the biggest things we struggle with is using pain medication at the end of life and how much it will or will not sedate the patient. Because for a lot of patients, quality of life is being able to talk to the family members. And the family members would tell you the same thing. I don't want her to be in pain, but I don't want her sedated and so sleepy that she can't talk to us. Well, of course, it's benefit versus burden, and you have to decide if we're only going to use the amount of medicine to cover the symptoms. You have to look at, are you willing to accept whatever threshold of sedation that includes? If there's intractable pain and we need heavy sedation or conscious sedation, you have to know that communication from your loved one, from your person, is probably not going to happen, but they're going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And I've even had families and patients that, years of sobriety or that they don't want to be interrupted or ended early. For them, it's a point of pride, and it's something they've worked very hard to achieve. Yeah. Or it's part of the culture to suffer. It's considered cleansing. Religious beliefs that include that, or people whose family members have had history of opioid abuse and they just don't want it in the house. A lot of different reasons.
This goes back to early conversations, right? Because like when I can, ultimately to me, I am honoring and uplifting what my patients' choices were for themselves. So when I can talk, usually when people come onto hospice and we're doing that first visit together, one of the ways that I articulate this is I talk about, like, right now we have, you're doing pretty well. Your symptoms are well managed. You're not talking about a lot of pain, but pain often is a part of the dying process. This is normal, but we have ways that we can help with that. We have medications that we can bring on board so that way you're not experiencing that pain. Or for those that are struggling with respiratory diseases or that shortness of breath, right? There's things that we can bring on board. But ultimately what this is like walking on a balance beam. and we have comfort and symptom management on one side, and we have functionality on the other side.
Right.
And our goal as your hospice team is to always make sure that we are prioritizing both. But as we get closer to the end of your life, that balance beam gets skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And ultimately, you're going to fall on one side or the other. So when we're looking at getting to the final days of your life, where these medications are necessary for you to have a peaceful passing, what do you want us to do here? What do you want that to look like? And so when the patients themselves can tell me, and sometimes it is bringing up concerns that you said, right? I have been sober and clean for so long. Let's talk about what that means within that context, right? And I think what tends to be the toughest part that I can say for myself as a clinician is, when maybe those conversations didn't happen, and I can tell that families are asking us not, or telling us not to use these medications, and some of it is because of misinformation.
Sure.
Right? Morphine. I saw my aunt took morphine and she died 2 days later. This misconception that morphine hastens death.
Yes.
While when you look at the empirical evidence, what we see is in palliative and hospice settings, when morphine is used appropriately, not only is there an extremely low risk for addiction, right? But what we're also seeing is it does not hasten the dying process. It just allows people to be comfortable. But so I think that can be the hard part, is when people just have their own fears that is rooted in misinformation compared to cultural or religious reasons, or, like you said, but prior addiction reasons.
If we don't have time to have those in-depth conversations, and let's face it, you can go out and you can have a lengthy visit, that first visit. But first of all, you're not going to be able, as a social worker or anybody from the hospice team, to be able to cover all of those questions.
Yeah.
How exhausting for a patient or a family member to have a conversation like that. And then, you're going to say, this is who I am and this is what I do. And then we're going to talk all the way in to the depth of what do you want to happen while you're dying.
Yeah.
That's a really hard ask of anybody. But when we're really constrained for time, those conversations get compressed, and we're asking a lot of really personal stuff from the very start.
Without question. I think the important piece is when I can tell that I have time, I always tell people, I just want you to think about this, right? You don't need to make any decisions right now, but as you have questions, as you're thinking about this, we'll continue to have these conversations. It's the same thing when, somebody admits to hospice and they're at home, and we're kind of meeting for the first time. If I'm concerned or don't see that we have a plan put into place for how their care needs are going to get met when they get to the end of their life. Again, by no means do I expect every T to be crossed or I to be dotted, but people need to start hearing about it early, because it can take their minds a while to wrap around all what happens at end of life. And so I would rather say, I just want to plant this seed right now, but we can circle back to this later. Yeah. But sometimes, like you said, we just don't have that privilege of time when people enroll in hospice so late. Well,
none of those conversations are one and done. No. It's like pouring water onto ground that has been experiencing drought.
Yes.
It's going to take a while for it to soak in, and it's going to take a lot. We have to let people ask their questions again, offer them the grace to ask it repeatedly if that's what they need, so that we can provide an answer in a form that works for them, that they can hold on to, that makes sense, that they understand. It's really pretty complicated.
Yeah.
We're going to break for just a minute. This isn't the end of the episode. There's more to come, so stay connected.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice is being sponsored by Care Boss, the latest book by Jennifer O'Brien. Jennifer O'Brien has served in healthcare leadership for over 35 years and was also the personal caregiver for her parents and her husband, Dr. Bob Limberg. She is the author of The Hospice Doctor's Widow, an art journal of caregiving and grief. Care Boss is her latest book, and it's more than just a book. It's a workbook and organizer that enables family caregivers to lead their loved ones' care sensitively and effectively. Jennifer writes with compassion and hard-earned wisdom. and readers will appreciate the empowerment and camaraderie they find in the pages of CareBoss. CareBoss reminds family caregivers that they are the CEO of their loved one's care. You can find CareBoss at your local indie bookstore or on Amazon and on Jennifer's personal website at jenniferaobrien.com.
So one of the skills that you have is promoting these conversations.
Yeah.
Why do you feel that those really deep conversations about sensitive topics are so important? Because we were talking, when you and I talked before, about denial.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times hospice teams will say, well, this patient didn't want to be admitted because they're not ready.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't have the luxury of having in-depth conversations with folks before, upstream far enough to impact that sometimes. What do you think about the denial as we label it? Do you think that's a healthy coping mechanism? How can it be leveraged?
I mean, so I think to talk about denial is also to understand denial, right? So every single one of us have defense mechanisms that we resort to when we are in states where we don't feel safe. When our sympathetic nervous system gets activated and we get nervous and all of a sudden our amygdala starts firing saying, this doesn't feel safe. This feels scary. This could be painful, right?
Yeah. Fight or flight, fight or flight.
Yes, right. We employ these defense mechanisms that most of us have learned from childhood, and they have benefited us at some point in our life, right? That's why we resort back to them. Coping mechanisms can still be maladaptive and still be helpful in the time at the same time.
Right.
So when I think about denial, I really try to have a lot of grace. I recognize that denial might be helping them in the short term. It might be helping them right now in this moment, but in the long term, it isn't. In the long term, the hard part is if we stay in this denial phase, that ultimately we can't problem solve. We're not making thoughtful decisions. And then, I say this a lot, but then it gets back to this reactive versus proactive. When we can start having conversations early, and that doesn't mean pushing our own agenda, but starting the conversation, starting to give the information so that way they can slowly start absorbing it, right? I talk about how we can't bust through a brick wall of denial with a sledgehammer. It just doesn't work that way. It's going to make them crumble at their foundation. But when we can be able to take down that wall of denial brick by providing education, providing choices, providing support, providing normalization of how hard this is. This is so hard. I think it's so easy for us as end-of-life clinicians to talk about some of these pieces more matter-of-factly because it's our day-to-day. And there's parts of us who have to become a little desensitized in order to do this every day.
Sure.
But when we can stop and remember how painful it is to lose somebody that we love and how scary it is to have somebody that we love with all of our hearts be going through a process of a terminal diagnosis and having all those questions and all, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And so I think when we can normalize that with people too, there's a lot of power in that, making them not feel alone.
Well, when you put it into perspective, say an outpatient hospice social worker may have, I'm just guessing, say a caseload of 30 patients.
Sure.
They're all in the same sort of situations. Somebody with a serious illness, some form of family caregiver, a caregiver, unpaid, is supporting them and helping them and dealing with the grief and all the issues that come up with it. So that's 30 or 40 people. That caregiver has one person.
Mm-hmm.
One person. They are not concerned about all the rest of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not their job.
Nope.
But we do have a tendency to, I think as healthcare providers, to overlook that portion of it because it does help us get through the day. We have to be productive. It's part of the work that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also easy to lose sight of the personhood inside the patient. I should write that down. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's easy to lose sight of that.
And I want to give clinicians a lot of credit too, because none of us go into this work for the money. Let's be real, from nursing to social work to, it's there's much more ways that we could be making a buck here. We go into this for all the right reasons, but we are living and working within a healthcare system that has an efficiency-based model. Right? Like talking about productivity. How many patients did you see today? Well, you didn't see enough patients. It doesn't matter how much time you spent with each one. Like, you need to see this certain amount. And so I think that there is pressure there too. It's a ripple down effect, right? Within the systems that we work with. That again, it is a job too, that we need to get the job done. And because of some of those pressures, some of those efficiency-based models, it can be more challenging for clinicians. And make it think about something.
The thought has occurred to me so many times about how we have an industry, a factory for pumping out healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not constructing cars. We're not making computer chips. We're not making clothes or, nothing like that. We're not making a product, a computer, toothbrushes. It's not an assembly line, or at least it shouldn't look like that, because these are people. So it's an Apple system with orange subjects. It's an apples to orange relationship that doesn't really make sense to me. And of course, that's why the healthcare system is so jacked up. It's like an assembly line, but it's not an appropriate model for dealing with a human being. And at this particular phase of life, when they are getting to the end of things, I think our healthcare systems and the support we provide often become less and less appropriate. We can't seem to match the need. And to me, that's where hospice and palliative care come in. Right? I think it's fantastic myself after working in it for 15 years. But I do see where people get overwhelmed and they don't want to engage. You can call it denial, whatever you want to. And of course, denial is a very normal human part of grief.
Yes,
it's one of those 5, right? And we say phases, stages. I would just say qualities, five qualities of grief, because it is not linear. And you can go back and forth in between acceptance and denial. And I think a lot of family caregivers do. When there's a realization, you walk in and all of a sudden you look at dad and you think, wow, he hasn't been out of that chair except to go to the bathroom in a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of a sudden there's some realization and acceptance of what's going on.
Absolutely. And then the next day we can call them and say, I'm seeing these changes. I'm worried about, again, we'll go back to the pain medication, right? I'm worried that I'm seeing some discomfort with your dad. How would you feel about us starting him? And by the way, we always start on such a low dose. This as a nurse.
Low and slow, always.
And and then we can resort back to, now we're seeing a little bit more of denial here, right? And I think those of us who have read Kubler-Ross's On Death and Dying know that this is what she talks about. I think this is, people who talk about the stages of grief never actually read her book, because, she doesn't talk about it as this linear process. She articulates it exactly how you did, Helen, where it can go forward and backward. And, sometimes some of our patients, they never leave the denial stage. They die in that denial stage, right? And so I think she was trying to give context at a time when there wasn't one. And, and again, too, it wasn't talking about grief in the bereavement stage. It was talking about the stages of qualities. I like that word, qualities of grief within the anticipatory grief stage, right? So individuals who knew that they were living with a life-limiting condition, and that they were in the final chapter of life, as these are some of the emotional experiences that they and their loved ones could experience.
Right. Some or all of them.
Yep.
At the same time. But no, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross never meant for that to be linear. That's sort of become the argument against the 5 qualities of grief these days, is that, it shouldn't be linear. It was never designed to be that way.
No, I tell people to pick up the book. Pick up the book before you start talking.
Listen, grief is messy, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross knew that it was. She
Yeah.
was
Yep.
before her time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about a special service that you offer because you help clients write obituaries.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just an obituary. It's just going to be printed in the paper, says a little bit about the person, beginning and ending, who's related to them, where they lived. Why is it so difficult for us to write an obituary for somebody we know or somebody we love?
Well, I will say that I help my clients while they are alive write their own obituary. So
Interesting.
then it doesn't fall to their loved ones to do this. So, and I mean, this is really hospice and palliative care social work 101 right here, right? Is even when you're talking about separating, being so, I don't know, I'm trying to find the right language here. Not looking at just the patient as a number or patient as a diagnosis, right? But getting to know them. I feel like that those are the qualities of a social worker. Like that's what we do within the healthcare system, is to get to know the person as the person and to help, address issues or needs that they have within the systems that they have. But to do that, we have to get to know who the person is. And so, as a hospice social worker, there's many times where I facilitate life review. I use components of dignity therapy is a beautiful modality, but as a hospice clinician, I oftentimes don't have the resources or the bandwidth to do the entire intervention. But the questions that are within that can be so helpful in saying, like, what in your life has been meaningful to you? When you think back on your life, what are your most proudest moments? If you could do this again, what would you do differently? What lesson do you want to pass on to those after you're gone? What do you want your legacy to be? And these are questions that I ask patients that I work with every single day, just to get them to think about their life. And sometimes in death work, we need to pull their life back into this, right? Like we focus so much on that last chapter that it's like, no, let's go back and review the whole book, right? And so oftentimes that's how I start, is just by asking those questions and filling in the gaps there. So that way, when that person does die, it's a bit of a gift that they can give their loved ones, is my obituary is already written. All you need to put in is the date of death and, any other last details that you want to put in there. But it can be a really beautiful intervention to get them to reflect on their life and then to go back and read the obituary that I've written after we've had this time together.
I love that an obituary would be included as part of advanced care planning.
That's it.
I don't know that we always think about it that way.
No. And I have found that individuals do want to write their own obituaries.
Really?
I recently did a local workshop here at an assisted living setting, and it was about writing your own obituary. And the room was packed. They had to invite me back because there was 35, individuals that lived just at that one assisted living that wanted to come and were engaged in the conversation and sharing their thoughts. And of course, all had different perspectives too. Some wanted it short and sweet. Mm-hmm. Some wanted to almost make it into like a letter, right? That they wrote and they send. Others wanted to make it funny and clever. Others really wanted their religion and their faith to shine through. So I think that's the other really beautiful thing too, is every single one can be a little bit different. And I provide permission for that. We don't have to just go back to like what the stereotypical obituary can look like. We can make it whatever you want it to be.
That is so cool. It's all about the personhood, isn't it?
Yes. And I think when you're asked, why is this so hard for loved ones? They are grieving. We just talked about this, right? Like they are in the thick of grief and they aren't thinking straight, let alone have their creative writing hat on. Every once in a while you'll come across, somebody who does have that skill set, right? And to them, it really gives them purpose and meaning to reflect back on their loved one's life and to write this. Like there's a lot of meaning in that. But I will say that isn't the norm. Right? That's not, I haven't found that to be the norm. A lot of people, like you said, really struggle, loved ones after the fact, struggle to write this obituary. And I think it does. It comes down to overwhelm, the amount of tasks that are on their plate, if writing has never been their strong suit. And so I will even give this tip as well, too. If you are somebody listening to this and you're saying, yeah, that's me, I'm just not a great writer, go to ChatGPT. Put in some basic thing. I'm not kidding though. Like I totally agree. You can put in the things that you know about your loved one. And, I have an outline too that I share with people. So fill it out to the best of your ability. Give ChatGPT some guidance of like, I want this to be funny because that's who my dad was, or I want this to be more serious, or like give them a feel for it.
I want it to be spiritual.
Yes, exactly. Right. And I want it has to be only this many words. Right. So if you're somebody who's like, I can fill out this questionnaire because I know kind of some of these basic facts that go into the obituary. Man, I'm not a creative writer. Use the tools that we have nowadays.
Yeah. Let the technology work for you. I love that idea. That's awesome. That is awesome. Oh, I hope my listeners pick up on that because I think that's really great. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to talk about a better, I know, how did we do that? I want to talk about a better ending. I want to talk about the services you're providing. You started this, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, November of 2022.
So tell me the work you're doing at A Better Ending and how you're supporting people.
Yeah, so, the drive to start my company is for a lot of the reasons that we discussed is I felt I was on this revolving door of reactivity within the healthcare system, and that I would meet individuals who didn't do any of this pre-planning, didn't do this upstream, right? And I saw the impacts that it had on the patient themselves, on their loved ones, and honestly, even on the medical team. And I wanted to take a step back and say, how can I help normalize and empower and equip these conversations and this planning to take place? So that's really where A Better Ending stemmed from, is that desire to help us die better than we are doing in today's society. So to do that, here in the Twin Cities, I'm in Minnesota, Minneapolis. So I will see clients here in person and work with them and their families to help with this planning. I've worked with people in their 30s who, just went through a really traumatic death with their parent and said, I don't want that. I don't want to be in the ICU hooked up to machines. Like, what do I need to do to put a plan into place? To people in their 50s and 60s who want to have things prepared for their children in case, again, something unexpected happens. To people who are diagnosed with a life-limiting condition and are saying, I want to be intentional and I want to be thoughtful about this. So it's both helping them come up with really clear plans with what our options are here in the Twin Cities and, putting that plan into writing. And also, as a clinical social worker, I'm a counselor, right? So counseling them through and supporting their family. And I would say also being the facilitator of that conversation. Yeah. I think that can be one of the toughest pieces is we live in a little bit of a death illiterate society. So even people who want to have this conversation, man, they don't know how, or they don't know how to start it, or they don't know where to take it. And so I go in their home, I sit at their kitchen table and I help with that conversation. The other part of my company is education, both in a community setting and also amongst professionals. Us hospice and palliative clinicians, we have a special insight that I think a lot of other specialties would like to hone in on some of those skills surrounding communication and courageous conversations. And, I do believe that. And so when I can jump into spaces to enhance their skill set around maybe ethical end-of-life issues, like I mentioned, those courageous conversations, death anxiety, I do that here both locally and nationally. And have just started this year as a keynote speaker for a few different conferences, talking about not only how we can die better, but also how we can live better and more intentionally. So when we get to the end of our lives, we feel more prepared.
I love it. Love it. How can my listeners connect with you?
I think my website is a great place to start. There's quite a bit of information on there. You can shoot me an email from there as well, too, if you'd like to get in touch. You can also follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Awesome. So it's abetterending.org, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Perfect. Rosie, we're going to have you back because we didn't cover everything we wanted to talk about. It was so great to have you on the show. Thanks for spending time with me today.
It was such an honor to be with you and your listeners. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are, or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.